Night shift gas station clerks. What's the weirdest thing you've ever encountered? Story 1. Not a gas station, but a train station cafe. There were overnight works going on, so we stayed open until 1 or 2 a.m. for the builders. One night, this older gentleman comes in, well-dressed, asks for a coffee, but can't pay when I make it. I give it to him anyway, since I'll just throw it away otherwise. And he asks me for some cake. I refuse, and he goes, "I sing for my supper," and then starts to belt out Frank Sinatra right there in the shop, and he just won't stop. He's there for like half an hour. I tried to get security to look after him because he clearly wasn't all there. Found him later singing for the builders who were giving him sandwiches. Eventually called the local police, who got him supervised until he could catch a train home in the morning. Are we sure this wasn't a witness sighting of the ghost of Frank Sinatra? The nicely dressed guy catching a late-night train? Sounds exactly like something old Frankie would do. I'm curious if he was any good with his singing, or was it atrocious? Thankfully, Fly Me to the Moon didn't turn into Drive Me to the Police Station. Story 2. Bought some gas one night before pay at the pump, and when I came inside, saw the clerk was my friend Dan from high school. Maybe a couple years ago then. We have a grand old reunion through the pay slot under the glass before he buzzes me inside. I comment on how bulletproof the place looks, and he says, yeah, it's supposed to be. I was on my way home from a girls' night out and had nothing to do, so sat on a stool and we traded what we knew people were up to, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly, this guy in a black hoodie just materializes at the pay slot, and I clearly hear the words, "All the money. I have a weapon." Inch-thick glass or not, I'm ready to freak, but I hear Dan's calm voice. "I'm sorry, sir, but company policy is that I have to see the weapon, or I could lose my job." The guy holds his finger up like just a sec and fishes out this big black weapon from his cargo pants. He presents it in 2 hands like he's going to pawn it. I can see a big screw at the bottom of the grip, which looks funny, but what do I know? Dan again. I'm sorry, that's just a pellet gun, sir, and that doesn't qualify." The would-be robber packs up and leaves, muttering as he goes. Dan calls the cops and sees I'm shaking. He gives me a hug and points out the pay slots are scooped into the counter so that a hand around a weapon can't possibly fit under the glass. The owner had showed him with a plastic gun. I still thought that was pretty cool of my school buddy. Story 3. I worked in a rural gas station garage when I was in high school, and one evening I was working and there were some pretty bad storms brewing. It didn't take long for there to be a fairly large group of people stopped at the station to find some shelter. I didn't think much of it, it wasn't the first time it had happened, but then they started blowing the tornado sirens. All of a sudden, there's a bunch of adults and families looking at little 16-year-old me looking for answers. There's no basement, so I did the first thing I could think of and shoved them all in the walk-in cooler. Shut us all in and rode out the storm. And when it passed, I went out and there was a big plate glass window busted and some things blown around the store. All the people came out of the cooler and were pretty much like, "See you later," and left. I was pretty much left there by myself like, what just happened? Story 4. I don't work the night shift exactly, but this will work. So my store closes at 10 p.m. I came in one morning at around 4:45-ish to find an old Native American man passed out in our kitchen. We have a rather large kitchen because we work next to an industrial area with lots of truck drivers and oil field workers who start their day early. So we make lots of food for breakfast and lunch. So I called the police because what am I supposed to do? The police showed up like 15 minutes later with some paramedics, and the guy was just asleep. Apparently, he came in around 9:30 p.m. the night before to use the bathroom and got locked in when the 2 night shift employees locked up. He didn't have a phone and didn't think to look for ours, so he got a 6-pack of beer out, ate some of our bread, and went to sleep next to the grill. I think some extra training is needed for your 2 night shift employees. They apparently forgot an important step of locking up a store, which is to make sure that everyone is out of the store first. Like, how hard would it be to do a quick bathroom check? Maybe they were thinking they don't get paid enough to have that level of responsibility, but they should probably at least pay for the beer and bread out of their next paycheck. Story 5. I was a 7-Eleven night clerk for about 5 years when I was young. Nothing too outrageous happened. The big nightly event was the 2 a.m. rush, the cutoff for selling alcohol, when I'd run a bar through the beer cooler doors. There was always a bunch of people coming in just before, and always a few coming in after that would beg and argue, and I'd just have to say no. One time around 3 a.m., an older, drunk, but well-dressed Mexican guy comes in, 2 really pretty girls with him, argues and pleads with me to sell him some beer for about 15 minutes. He was oddly pleasant, seemed like a guy no one said no to, but I said no. He went out with the girls, then came back in alone, looked at me and smiled, pulled out a giant wad of bills from his pocket, and peeled off a 20, sat it on the counter, walked over to the cooler, and pulled out a case of beer through the bars. Then, as I'm telling him I can't sell that to him, he reaches in his other pocket and pulls out a baggie of white powder, wags it in the air in front of me, significantly, sits it on the $20 bill and says, "Está todo bien, mi amigo," with a wink, and walks out the door with the beer. Another time, around 3 a.m., again these two girls come in and wandered the store for about a half an hour, laughing at everything. Literally rolling on the floor laughing, reading the labels of the candy bars and stuff like that. I talked to them enough that they told me that they'd eaten some mushrooms. Finally, they picked out a couple of candy bars and a couple sodas. At the counter, I rang them up and they realized they didn't have any money, which was hilariously funny, and they were on the floor laughing again. I bagged their stuff and told them not to worry about it. Sweeping the lot after they left, I could hear them still laughing down the street. Story 6. I used to work the night shift at a gas station in Florida straight out of high school. It was a great job. It was so slow, and the other cashier and I would hang out front and smoke cigs if we didn't have customers, and sometimes a friend or two would drop by. Well, one night we were doing just that, and we saw a truck coming up the road being pushed by 4 guys and followed closely by a police car and another car. The truck is clearly out of gas, and having worked there for a while, this is more common than people think. We figure the police car is slowly riding behind them so that another car doesn't slam into them. This is a normal procedure for police in my city. Well, the exact moment the truck is pushed up to a pump, a swarm of police cars fly into the only entrance of the gas station, completely blocking it off. All of the cops are now aiming their firearms at the guys who pushed the truck, yelling at them to get on the ground and not move. One of the guys started reaching in the truck, and I thought he was about to get blown away. I should mention that the angle of attack put us in the line of fire. After they arrest 2 of the guys, and the other 2 were just good guys helping to push the truck, we found out that they had robbed another gas station up the street. Apparently, the truck's description didn't match, but they got the license plate right, and when the cop pulled up behind the truck to make sure they didn't get hit, he ran the plates and called for backup. Story 7. When I was in high school, I worked overnights during the summer, only cashiers in the store. I'm working towards the back of the store, and the cashier island is right in the middle, covered with machines. Now, I'm pretty tall, so I can see over most of them. The door ding goes off, so I start making my way around to the counter. As I'm doing this, a cowboy walks in. I see his hat float across the top of the deli case, the soda machine, etc. I greet him, and he greets me back. I really couldn't see him well at all, though. He makes his way to get a fountain drink and walks back around to the counter. He has his hat tipped down Marlboro Man style, didn't think much of it until I rang him up and gave him the total. He digs in his pocket and hands me a couple of dollars, except his hand was completely melted. Fingers were missing and the skin was burned off. He was healed over, it wasn't a fresh wound. Then he tipped his hat back and his entire head had been burned. No hair, full burned skin. No lips, no nose, and his teeth were bare. It was shocking to see. I was 17 and it was 3 a.m. on a Saturday night. My jaw dropped. I froze with the money in my hand. He just politely said, "Hey, you owe me some change." I fumbled to finish the sale and send him off, and I apologized for my reaction, and he just blew it off. And then he said, I get that a lot, but I'm a hell of a lot of fun around Halloween, and we both laughed about that. I lived in a small town, and nobody knew this guy. I would ask people for the next couple of years, and still, people would think that I made it up. Since nobody knew who this stranger was, that means he is just floating through the country at night, being mysterious and terrifying teenage store clerks. That had to be pretty alarming to see, and being so young, that kid probably had never seen anything like that. Obviously, there are many questions about what would have happened to cause such disfigurement. In the comments, what are your best guesses to what happened to the cowboy's face? Story 8. Nothing really weird happened per se. I worked at a Florida gas station for 3 years while in college. I saw a little kitten one night near midnight wander through the gas pumps crying out. Cars were driving around the lot, and it could have gotten squashed at any moment. So I ran outside, leaving customers at the counter, and scooped him up. He was filthy. Brought him around back, and since I had no cage or nothing to put him in, I placed him inside a Lay's plastic tote, closed the top, and put a brick on top so he'd stay in. Took him home after my shift, and then put him on the patio. Surprised my family the next day with a surprise kitten, but to my horror, his colon was prolapsing out of his body in a bloody infected mess. Took him to the vet, who said he probably got attacked by some animal. They gave him a bath, gave him shots, and put him on an antibiotic. And when old enough, I got him neutered. The antibiotic fixed the prolapsing colon within a week, and he's still alive today, about 10 years old, and more of an inside kitty now than an outside kitty. His name is Kitty, too. Story 9. I worked overnights at an isolated gas station the summer after I graduated high school, way back in the late 1980s. This gas station had hot pizza in a clear case, and this case opened from the back. You'd open the case, pull out a slice, put it on a plate, and then hand it to the customer. One day when I came in at 11 p.m., there were 3 slices left in the case, which was 3 or 4 feet down the counter from the register. I had 1 piece for dinner and then went about working my shift, which consisted of standing at the register waiting for people to wander in. It was a slow shift. I only had 4 or 5 customers in a couple hours, not a busy shift by any means, and most just wanted lottery tickets or to pay for gas or grab a pop. But by 1 a.m., there was no one in the store or at the pumps, so I got started neating up the store, always in hindsight of the front counter, the register, the lotto machine, and the pizza case, and no one came in for an hour. I was schlepping around trying to make it look like I was working. Figuring the pizza was pretty well dried out by then, I went to throw it out. Opened the case, and there was just an empty tray. Somehow, 2 slices of probably 5 hours old pizza disappeared. Now, the only way to get into the pizza case was to get behind the counter, and to do that, you had to punch in a code, and then the door would buzz really loud and unlock. In other words, you wouldn't just reach around the counter and get to the pizza. I scratched my head, spent the rest of my shift nervously worrying that there was some rando pizza-eating killer hiding in the store. And when a sheriff's deputy came in around 4 a.m., I asked him to check the building for any intruders. He didn't find any. Before leaving at the end of my shift, I wrote a note to my boss detailing what happened, and then went home. When I came in for my next shift, he was there waiting and told me he reviewed the video. There were cameras aimed at the front counter, door, and over the store, and then he played it back for me. It showed me ringing up a customer, then going out and neatening up the shelves. Meanwhile, out of the front counter camera, a couple of minutes after I left the counter area, the camera got shaky and then went static for 30 seconds or so. When it came back on, the pizza was no longer in the case. Never happened again while I worked there, which was for another 6 months or so, and we never did figure out what happened. Story 10. One slow weeknight, I had a guy come in wearing nothing but shorts and a blanket. He seems freaked out, but relatively under control. No yelling or running around or anything. When I asked him what happened, he asked me to call the cops, as there are some people who want to eat him. Naturally, I comply. Cannibals or not, something is obviously going on with this guy. Now, the place I worked was a little stretch of empty highway between 2 towns, and not really properly in either one of them, meaning the local police don't really come up that way. It's technically the county sheriff's jurisdiction as far as I understand. Regardless, the bottom line is that we normally have to wait quite a while for anyone to arrive. I informed the guy of this. He looks concerned and goes to the door, I assume to wait outside. At the same time, while I'm on the phone with the police, another guy rolls up and I notice that he seems to have left his truck running. Head and interior lights on, engine humming, real obvious. I turn to inform him of this right as the blanket guy hops in the truck and speeds off. Now I still have the cops on the line, so I inform them of this as well. Truck guy naturally freaks and then runs outside. A little while, my sort of coworker who the managers pay to watch the lot and help out a bit comes in and swears up and down he sees a car roll up with blanket guy on its hood and just dump him there. I took his word for it. The police eventually come and tell me they caught him and take the other guy away. And that's the last I ever really heard of it. I wouldn't want to work as a gas station clerk to begin with, but especially would not want to work nights in the middle of nowhere. If law enforcement is that far away, if something happens, you're pretty much on your own if somebody comes in to rob the place or steal a truck. And if the guy actually thought people were going to eat him, he obviously is high on something and who knows what could have gone down now. I bet a longtime night clerk would write some interesting stories in a memoir. I'd buy that book. Story 11. I used to be an overnight manager at Walmart, if that counts, and one night I was heading to the break room to eat, and I walked in to find a 7-foot-tall muscular man with a giant gray and black afro sitting there talking to himself. Kind of reminded you of Uncle Ruckus in the face. I think he even had a false eye. I sat across from him and started eating, thinking he might be a Walmart driver just getting some coffee or something. I asked him if he was a driver, and he started laughing and said, "Yeah, I used to drive cars a whole lot." I was like, "Okay, I mean a Walmart driver," and he just got up and started laughing and left the break room and the food he was eating behind. That food, turned out later, was a random associate's lunch that they packed. I called my support manager to have him on the lookout in case he did anything else crazy, just for my associate's safety. Later that night, they called me to the front door for an emergency. Apparently, the man had a wallet and watch that he was trying to trade for instead of paying for it. Like, the man was straight up trying to barter with random objects he had on his person. When we stopped him at the door, he threw a fit, started cussing at us, and drove off on a powered shopping cart. We watched him drive all the way off the lot and on the main road, so then I called the police. They pulled him over about a mile from the store, and the cops came back and talked to me. They told me the man escaped from a mental hospital, and they guessed he had changed clothes in the store. The officer also told me that he was in custody, and I also had to come get the scooter, or they would have to impound it. I had to get in the police car, ride to the scooter, and then drive it back to the store at night with a police escort. I took the opportunity to mess with my wife on FaceTime. I called her up and had the police car behind me with the lights on, and I was yelling, "Baby, baby, I messed up badly. Wait for me on the outside." And then I hung up on her. It was a crazy night, though. Story 12. I worked at a gas station and fried chicken joint. Yeah, you know, it was in the South. When I was in high school. One evening, this older guy came in reeking of alcohol, wearing a bowler hat, and a ratty old Hawaiian shirt, boxers, and slides. No pants. He walked into the store, looked at me and my coworker, and his eyes went real wide, like dinner plates. Then he promptly turned around and left the store. Now, I thought this was odd, but went about my cleaning until I rounded the corner to where he was, and lo and behold, on the floor was a solitary turd that was previously obscured by the counter. This man had walked into our gas station and crapped on the floor and immediately turned tail and left without so much as a word. Really makes me wonder what kind of life this feller was living. Needless to say, I refused to clean it up, as $7.50 an hour isn't enough to pay me to clean up human excrement. Thankfully, the shift lead cleaned it. I guess she valued her job more than I did. We printed out the guy's face from the security cameras and made sure that he was put on our crap list. Ha! Crap list. Get it? Clearly this guy needs to switch to boxer briefs instead of your traditional loose boxers. That would have at least given him some more security to just contain the turd until he can scurry off to a bathroom. I say that, but it also seems like he couldn't care less about what he left on the floor. At least it's a little bit easier to clean up than the liquid alternative. I can't imagine being that drunk that you can't control your bowels for even more than 1 second, or long enough to run to a bathroom. That's how you know you've reached rock bottom. Story 13. As a teenager, I went around to gas stations and asked if I could sell stuff outside of their store for a fundraiser for school, maybe. Most of the time they said yes, but one time I was told, only if you come past 7. The gas station manager assured that he would be there, and so my parents agreed that it was fine. The manager came out to check on me every once in a while, and after maybe the third check-in, a shady-looking guy came around the corner. I had a weapon on me, so I wasn't that frightened, but the guy scared me a little bit. It's 8 p.m. and I'm a 5'2" teenage girl outside a gas station, so a crime would be easy. I did my little opening spiel, talking about what the fundraiser was for, and he completely ignored that. The guy looked at my sweatshirt, which had my high school's logo on it, and obviously realized I went there. He started to open his jacket, and I thought maybe he was going to offer me something, but in his jacket there were leaves. Every single one was from a different type of tree. He asked if I wanted one, so I politely declined. Before he turned away, I looked at his face and realized he was high. The manager came out later and asked how everything was going, and they laughed so hard it was ridiculous. Can we talk about this hard high schooler who rolls around at 5'2" while carrying a weapon and doing her fundraising? She apparently does some frequent fundraising in some sketchy areas. And what is with the guy just walking around with leaves under his jacket? Of all the things that you could be hiding in your jacket to sell, leaves would have been the last thing I would have guessed. I think I would have laughed at that too when told, "Hey, we've got a guy high as a kite walking around selling leaves to people."